You're standing in the mud. It's roughly 3500 BC. There's no road, there's no cart, there's no Amazon delivery guy leaving a package on your doorstep. If you want to move something heavy, you drag it. You drag it across dirt, across rock, across your own back if you have to. And somewhere, at some point, one of your ancestors looked at a heavy, round log rolling down a hill and thought, wait, what if I did that on purpose? This is the story of how humans invented the wheel. Not the car, not the bicycle, not the shopping cart with the one wheel that always squeaks. We're talking about the very first time a human being looked at a circle and realized it could change everything, and why it took so unbelievably long to happen that it should honestly embarrass our entire species. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. The wheel is not as obvious as it looks. It feels obvious now. It feels like something a caveman should have figured out in an afternoon. Round thing, rolls, less friction, done. But humans had fire for 1,000,000 years, had complex language, had art, had agriculture, had built actual cities before anyone put a wheel on an axle and used it to move something. The wheel isn't old, it's shockingly, almost insultingly recent, and the reason why is one of the strangest stories in the history of technology. Let's start with what humans were doing before the wheel existed, because for most of human history, moving heavy things meant one of two options. You carried it or you dragged it. Archaeologists have found evidence of sledges, flat wooden platforms with no wheels at all, used to haul loads across land as far back as 8000 BC. Some cultures dragged stones on logs laid side by side, essentially rolling the load over a moving carpet of timber, picking up the back log and placing it at the front over and over again. It worked, it built pyramids, it moved stones weighing tons across entire countries, but it was brutally slow. It required enormous manpower, and it only worked efficiently on flat ground. Humans clearly understood that round things rolled. Rocks roll downhill. Logs roll if you kick them. That knowledge is ancient and completely unremarkable. What's remarkable is that nobody turned that observation into a tool for thousands of years. So when did it actually happen? Here's where the story gets genuinely surprising. The wheel's first job wasn't transportation. Its first job was pottery. The oldest confirmed wheel-like device in human history is the potter's wheel, and it shows up in Mesopotamia, in the region we now call Iraq, around 3500 BC. Archaeologists found evidence of rotating platforms used to shape clay, spinning fast and smooth enough to throw a symmetrical pot. Think about that for a second. Before the wheel ever moved a human being 1 inch, it was already spinning in a workshop, shaping mud into bowls. The circle was working in a lab before it was working on a road. It took a few more centuries for someone to make the leap from a spinning disc to a rolling disc under a cart. The earliest depictions of actual wheeled vehicles come from Sumerian pictographs dating to roughly 3500 to 3350 BC, showing sledges mounted on rollers, an early hybrid between dragging and rolling. And the oldest physical wheel ever discovered, an actual wooden wheel, not a drawing, not a carving, a real object, was found in the Ljubljana marshes in modern-day Slovenia. It's made of ash wood, fitted onto an oak axle, and radiocarbon dating puts it at around 3130 BC. That wheel is over 5,000 years old, and it still shows tool marks from the person who carved it. Somewhere in Bronze Age Europe, a human sat down, cut a disc out of a tree, and changed the entire trajectory of civilization, and we will never know their name. Now, here's a detail that should genuinely mess with your understanding of how invention works. The wheel wasn't invented once and copied everywhere. It appears to have been invented independently in at least 2 separate places on Earth, Mesopotamia and separately in Mesoamerica, modern-day Mexico and Central America. Except here's the twist. In Mesoamerica, the wheel was never used for transportation. Archaeologists have found wheeled toys, small clay animals on axles with wheels dating back roughly 1,500 years, used by children as playthings. The concept existed, the mechanism existed, and it was never scaled up into a cart or a chariot. Why? Because Mesoamerican civilizations had no large domesticated draft animals, no horses, no oxen, no donkeys strong enough to pull a loaded wheeled vehicle. A wheel without something to pull it is just a toy. The wheel needed a partner, and in the Americas, that partner never showed up until Europeans brought horses across the ocean in the 1500s. It's a brutal reminder that a great idea alone changes nothing. A great idea paired with the right conditions changes the world. Let's talk about where the wheel actually took off, because once it paired with animal power in Mesopotamia and the surrounding regions, things moved fast. By around 3000 BC, wheeled carts were being used across the Fertile Crescent for agriculture and transport. By 2000 BC, the spoked wheel had been developed, lighter, faster, stronger than the original solid wooden disc, and it revolutionized warfare through the war chariot. The Egyptians, the Hittites, and later the Assyrians built empires partly on the back of chariot warfare, fast, mobile, terrifying units of wheeled combat that reshaped how ancient armies fought. A technology that started as a tool to shape mud pots ended up deciding the outcomes of wars 1,000 years later. That is an absolutely wild career arc for a circle.
Here's a question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. Why did it take so long? Humans had been building complex structures, farming crops, domesticating animals, and creating writing systems for centuries before the wheel showed up. So why was rolling things such a late arrival? Engineers and historians point to a genuinely underrated problem, the axle. A wheel by itself is easy. A rock rolls, a log rolls. A child could figure that out. But a wheel that spins freely around a fixed axle while carrying a load, that requires precision. The hole in the wheel and the axle it sits on have to be smooth, close-fitting, and durable enough to handle friction and weight without splitting apart or grinding to a halt. That is a genuine engineering problem, one that requires good tools, good woodworking, and a level of mechanical thinking that simply had not developed yet in most societies. In other words, the wheel wasn't held back by imagination, it was held back by craftsmanship. Somebody had to be skilled enough with a chisel and an eye for tolerance to make a hole and a rod actually work together. That's not a caveman problem, that's a carpenter's problem, and it took thousands of years of woodworking evolution to arrive. There's also the terrain problem, and this one rarely gets mentioned. Wheels are only useful where the ground allows it. Flat, relatively firm terrain, roads, plains, cleared paths. In dense forests, in steep mountain regions, in soft desert sand, a wheel can actually perform worse than a sledge or a pack animal. Some historians argue that certain regions of the world simply never had a strong incentive to develop wheeled transport because their landscape didn't reward it. The Inca Empire, for example, built one of the most sophisticated road networks in the ancient world, thousands of miles of stone paths across the Andes, and never used wheeled vehicles on them. Why would they? Their roads climbed near vertical mountain terrain, where a cart would be useless and a llama would not. The wheel isn't universally superior, it's situationally brilliant, and only in the right conditions does it stop being a curiosity and start being a revolution.
Let's go back to that early potter's wheel for a second, because there's something almost poetic about it that gets lost in most retellings of this story. The wheel's first job on Earth wasn't moving armies or hauling stone. It was creativity. It was shaping something beautiful and useful out of raw earth, spinning gently under a craftsman's hands. Only later did humans look at that spinning motion and realize the same principle could carry weight, could carry people, could carry entire civilizations forward. Function followed art. The practical followed the creative. That order matters. It's a reminder that some of the most world-changing inventions in human history didn't start as solutions to a problem. They started as somebody messing around, spinning clay, watching it turn, and noticing something. By the time recorded history properly begins, the wheel is already everywhere. It's on carts in Mesopotamia, it's on chariots in Egypt, it's spinning in pottery workshops across Asia, and from there it never really stopped evolving. The spoked wheel of the Bronze Age became the wheel of Roman chariots and medieval carts, and the wheel of windmills and watermills grinding grain across Europe, then the wheel of the printing press, then the gear systems of the Industrial Revolution, then the wheel of the bicycle, then the automobile, then the aircraft landing gear touching down on a runway. Every single one of those, at its core, is still the same idea. A disc spinning around a fixed point, reducing the friction between a load and the ground beneath it. 5,000 years later, we haven't replaced the concept. We've just gotten better at building the axle. So, when did humans first invent the wheel? The honest answer is around 3500 BC as a spinning tool, and a few centuries later as a way to actually move things. But the deeper answer is that the wheel wasn't really an invention of imagination. Imagination had been there the whole time, watching logs roll down hills for hundreds of thousands of years. The wheel was an invention of patience, of craftsmanship, of somebody finally getting good enough with their hands to make a hole and a rod work together smoothly. It's easy to look at ancient humans and assume they were simply waiting to get smart enough to invent things like this. The truth is almost the opposite. They were smart the entire time. They were just waiting to get skilled enough. There's something worth sitting with here. For all the technology that separates us from a Bronze Age carpenter carving an ash wood disc in a European marsh 5,000 years ago, there's a thin, unbroken thread running from that wheel to the one currently under your car, under the plane you last flew in, under the wheelchair, under the office chair you might be sitting in right now. Someone, somewhere, looked at a circle and asked, what if? And we still haven't stopped rolling with the answer.